All right, well, I want to welcome everybody to today's Excavation Safety Alliance Town Hall. My name's Scott Landis, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion. And the topic today is how can industry stakeholders better leverage data analytics to reduce damages and improve planning? And today's town hall is being sponsored by the Excavation Safety Guide. And just a reminder that we are the Excavation Safety Alliance. We were formerly Infrastructure Resources, but the ESA brand better reflects our mission and what we do. So with that, I also want to mention quickly that as someone who registered for the town hall, you are now by default an ESA individual member, which is free unless you choose to opt out. And all that means is you get some special newsletters and PDFs and things that will help you learn more and be better at damage prevention and excavation safety. We do have a company membership option, which if you like the town halls, it'd be awesome if you would pass that on within your company, because the company memberships are really how we're able to fund all these town halls and all the other things for free for the individual members. So with that, I do want to explain that the town halls are an open forum to discuss concerns, and we really stress to present potential solutions. That's really crucial. And one of the advantages of the town hall is that we can bring people literally from all over the world because it's virtual. And so not everybody gets all the information you're going to share today. So this is a great opportunity to talk about things that have worked for you, whether you're a panel member or a participant, and share them with others to help them solve their problems. The other quick tip before we get going is try to keep your comments brief, because an hour might seem like a long time, but it goes really fast, and we usually have a lot of great comments and questions. So get your point across, and then if you can, we'll move on. Also, a recording of this will be on our ESA YouTube channel almost right after we're done. And at the end, again, we will really ask each panel member for their suggestion on how to keep things moving forward, their big tip for taking away something you can use today. We will conclude at 11:30. We're really going to stay on time because I know everybody's got busy schedules. So that's a key tip. And with that, I think I also need to mention that everybody will be muted for now, but when you have a question, you can either type it into the chat or do the hand raise option, and we will get to you as soon as we can and unmute your mic and let you speak or read your question in the chat. So today we are really lucky to have, as you can see, a great panel. We've got 5 people with really diverse, extensive backgrounds in the industry. And so at this point, I'm going to let the panel members introduce themselves and talk just a little bit about, why they are experts in this area. And we'll start with Brian.
Thank you for having me, Scott. My name is Brian Peters. I'm the Chief Product Officer with Cortera Ticket Management. For those not familiar, Cortera manages the 811 tickets for over 1,000 customers across the US and Canada. I've been with Cortera for a couple of years. My previous experience was in government, healthcare, and cybersecurity solutions. And just note that while I do love software, I prefer to be out in the field and spend a lot of my time doing ride-alongs with locators and learning the craft and getting some paint on my boots. So I look forward to the discussion today.
Great, Demetrius.
Scott, thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Demetrius Pavlou. I'm Damage Prevention Manager for Atmos Energy. Atmos Energy, we are a gas distribution company. We have 3.5 million customers in serving 8 states. And I'm responsible for setting up and running our damage prevention program, which we are receiving 2.5 million locator requests annually. Before that, I'm an engineer by training, so I started from designing, survey, risk management, and now damage prevention. So I think I've closed a portion of the loop. Again, thank you for having me.
That's great. And Louis, how about you?
Well, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Louis Panzer. I'm the Executive Director of North Carolina 811. Been here for 12 years now. We have a very unique take on data since as a one-call center, we're kind of at the center of the hub of receiving requests and distributing tickets, also damage requests. So we're heavily involved in leveraging data to to try to establish trends in areas and identify the types of things that we can affect, whether that's, through education or process change, et cetera. So happy to be here as a part of the panel. Thank you, Scott.
You bet. Thanks, Louis. And Jason.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me, Scott. Jason Posier, Director of Locating for Metronet. Operate in 15 different states. I'm responsible for our locate management, both on the contract locator side as well as some internal resources I have in a few states. And my background from a data analytics perspective is, I'm responsible for all of that for Metronet, as well as assisting in the construction momentum as it applies to locate submission, et cetera. And then I used to work for USIC for a number of years doing data analytics and then a number of leadership positions over there. And then before that, I was a leader in the United States military for a number of years as well. But thank you for having me. Look forward to having this discussion.
Excellent. And last but not least, Dwayne.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Scott. Dwayne Rogers, CEO of Pelican Corp. We run one-call centers around the world. We provide software to those. We also do ticket management, and we also have locate companies. So I guess we've got an interest in every piece of this, and that whole 360. How we get data back and how we use data. So I'm sort of excited to listen to the panel here and talk and discuss some of the advantages of using data and the analytics of that data and how we can improve damage prevention. Thanks, Scott.
You bet. And thanks to the panel. This is, as you can tell, everybody, it's an awesome group with a really nice, great variety of experience. So we should have a really great discussion today. What we're going to do first is kick things off with the first question, and we'll go down the line and have each panel member kind of give their input on this question. And in the meantime, based on this question, if you've got questions out in the audience, put it in the chat, raise your hand, and we'll go to that. And if we don't have any questions on this specific question, then we will move on to the second one. But the first question is, what is data analytics, and how do you see it being used in the industry to improve the process in damage prevention? Dwayne, if you want to, why don't you kick it off since you were the last one? We'll reverse the order here and give you all a chance to have input.
Well, it's a great question. What is data analytics? And I think it's taking the data we're getting from specifically the tickets. It's not just the tickets though, and using that data in some way to enhance and to improve some outcomes. And I guess my perspective on it is, a lot of the data that's collected in the one-call systems today is data that's random. It's not structured. And I believe data analytics works best when you have structured data. If you can have different versions of addresses or different text and notes fields and people can describe things in different ways, then it's a lot harder for data to be utilized well. And then you need a lot of intelligence across it to interpret what the abbreviation was for that and what the abbreviation is for the other. So I think as much as I want to talk about how you use data to get better outcomes for damage prevention, I think the data coming in has to be well structured. And I think in a previous discussion, we talked about the fact that a lot of people have freeform in their one-call systems. We've been utilizing in our solutions drop-down lists and constructed lists of options to choose. So therefore, the data is really consistent, and with consistent data, you can get better outcomes. So that's probably my input to it to start with, Scott.
Mm-hmm. Great point. And how about you, Jason?
So I'm just going to kind of do some antonym soup here for me, right? What is data analytics? To me, it's synthesizing raw information to kind of inform decisions, right? You take that information, it doesn't make your decisions for you, right? We got to be cautious about allowing data to drive us to specific decision points based off of what we believe is the end state. So we got to make sure we capture as much raw information to make an intelligent and informed decisions from a damage prevention perspective, right? I can look at individual key points and go, all right, well, this will help me drive it. And then you're chasing your own tail, right? So we got to make sure we look at the whole picture, synthesize that information and understand what it is. And specifically as it applies to damage prevention, right? There's a lot of aspects to this, right? So we got to make sure we incorporate as much as we possibly can to make those right decisions and not go chasing our tail, making decisions that weren't appropriately informed.
Yep, excellent point. And Lewis, you're up.
Yeah, so data analytics to me basically means exactly what you've just heard, is you're synthesizing information. You're picking your sources so that they can reveal information and provide direction. I understand about the consistency issue that Dwayne's talking about. It's helpful to have those options available. If you don't, you can certainly map what your types are to a common set of ideas. But one of the other issues with data analytics is you can't presuppose what that data is going to tell you. A lot of times I think we walk into these situations and we expect an outcome. You have to let the data kind of reveal it to you, because in some cases you might be surprised as to why. And there may be underlying underpinning reasons behind something that you're not even getting at, but because you didn't ask the question correctly. So you have to know what it is you're looking for without presupposing an answer. You need to pull that information from multiple sources if you can. The ticket information is absolutely, as far as damage prevention, is a key. Also the demographics, the work types, everything that's basically kind of captured in dirt in a lot of ways is stuff that we can leverage. And it's best to analyze that on the local level as best you can, because that's where we affect the change, at least in our state, is at the county level and with the different types of stakeholders that may be producing outcomes that are less than desirable, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. Yeah, great input on that, Lewis. Demetrius, what about you?
Well, it's a great question, Scott. The way I say it is, I don't know if you all remember the trend we all had a few years ago about the skinny jeans, that everybody wants to look good and get skinny jeans. That's a bit about the data analytics. Everybody wants to get into that, but I'm not sure everybody understands what is that. For me, data analytics is the way that how we're going to convert raw information, raw data into actionable insight. And that might be different for an operator, different from an excavator, different from a land locating company. It will help business, save the business process, improve decision making, what is appropriate for its business, right? And help foster business growth. So all that, the tools, the people, the concept, how you collect that information, what's the appropriate information for you, and how you use them to identify who's going to make the decision. That is the whole package of data analytics.
Yeah, great point. Otherwise, it's just numbers. Okay, and Brian, what's your take?
Well, it's a fantastic analogy, Demetrius. So I'm going to bridge on that. So, as you pointed out, there is the fad of the visualization and reports that we all know data analytics to be. But from a system perspective, it's important for us to also talk about that data collection, which is what Dwayne was referencing there, along with the cleansing and transformation. Those are the underlying elements that make for strong and robust reporting. So for me, data analytics starts with that data collection and where we're getting that data from. It won't always be the call center. I think we point to the call centers and say, hey, you're the end all be all with data, but there's a lot more that can be captured during the locate with GIS information. So it's important to gather all those relevant pieces of information to cleanse that data. And I did see a question in the chat here about cleansing and transformation, and transforming that data to where you get to the point that you now have it and you can begin interpretation and generating insights, creating the visualizations. But The important thing I want to call out here is data analytics is more than just that report. It's the iceberg. 80% to 90% of the work to create those, to analyze the data is in that gathering, collection, and transformation. And I can't emphasize that enough. And so you'll probably hear me talk about that through this talk track today. It's much more than just reporting. It's collection, and oftentimes collecting things that maybe you didn't think were important end up being correlating components. So that's an important note that I'll emphasize for the rest of this panel discussion.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. And again, Lewis alluded to that too. And to your point, Brian, so Kurt Youngs is asking the question for any of you is, how do you take the raw data and weed out the chaff to get accurate info? And if any of you panel members want to chime in on that, just raise your hand, or if no one's talking, go for it.
Okay. Scott,
Go ahead.
I think there's a tendency, I've seen a lot across a number of one calls to actually collect data that seems good to the one call, doesn't necessarily add a lot to the other side, which is the ticket that goes out and then analyzing that ticket. So you've got to be careful about how many inputs you have and how you collect that data, back to what I said before, because otherwise, I mean, all the raw data should be something that actually contributes to giving us something that will reduce damages or help the locator or help the utility or help, the excavator. So yeah, it's about tuning it down, and hopefully there's no, chaff. And what I've seen a lot is, there's been a tendency with one calls to have these notes fields where people describe endlessly to the nth degree, where they want to have their ticket done, their locate done. And, we just have a different philosophy on that about how we record and get to that information visually as opposed to explaining in words. And, words can be interpreted so many ways. And so you're just going to be careful about how much raw data there is that allows people to interpret things in different ways.
Yeah, good comment. Was someone else is going to chime in on this?
Yeah, I just saw a question pop up about DIRT. To what Dwayne's point is basically, suggesting that some of that data is meaningless or whatever. And you're absolutely right from the standpoint of the one call center is not the end all be all. But I will say that descriptions, anything that's going to help assist the locator in either identifying the location or the specifics around that excavation are important to those one call centers. But one of the things that I saw slide up here as a question was, is the DIRT report not sufficient in sort of, I guess, managing the damage conversation and trending and analytics around that? I'll say that as a co-chair of the committee, I'll say that it's a continuous work in progress, right? So one of the goals that we're seeking for that is higher quality, first of all, and what's coming in on the front end, because as was said before, if the quality is poor, you really can't make strong decisions or make even extrapolate that into saying that this is what it means. Also, to the consistency point, that's been a conversation we've had as well. And drop boxes are effective in terms of pinning those things to the information that's tied into DIRT, which has been kind of built on for 15 years or so. So I know that group is looking at that, but they're also looking outside of that to try to figure out true numbers of damages beyond what's reported into DIRT. So there's a whole nother series of components that can be brought in this conversation when we try to extrapolate and to what we know about damages to how many there truly are.
Mm-hmm.
I think to respond to Kurt's question, I think we need to start to understand, the raw data and what is important for each business unit. Something that might be important for an operator might be different for the land locating company, might be different from the ticket management, or might be different from the excavator. And even within those brackets, there are different questions. For example, I might want to go and check and make my business decision based on my production. So the production, how many tickets per hour, have different factors that can contribute, and you need to clean the data in a different way. versus if you want to go and check what is my on-time performance, what is the ratio of damage or not. So I think to clean up and remove the chaff to get more accuracy, you need to better understand, how each data set contributes to your question, what exactly you're asking, and pinpoint the appropriate data set. That will clear the noise, and then you can drill down to it.
Yeah, that's also good. And I know kind of related to this, Tracy kind of chimed in with the kind of the question about excavators and adding layers to that question under root cause. If I'm reading her response right, is there the option for an excavator to choose, lack of training, equipment failure, or rush schedule as the reason for the accident? And I'm not sure I know that answer. Louis, you might, or if that can be done on a localized basis.
Well, just on the dirt form, there is the ability, but then the question comes about, does an excavator know if the locator was properly trained? I mean, so you have to ask the question is who's putting the data in, first of all, when you're asking questions. And going to the local level is absolutely, in my opinion, the best way to trend and the best way to apples to apples. If you're looking at affecting change in an area, some jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a region or any of that, looking at that data locally is going to tell you more, because you're going to have consistency probably in what you're gathering and the way that those fields are set up. You're going to have some basis for trending over time. And you'll be able to get a much better pulse on even the work types that are affecting damages, the equipment types that could be affecting damages, what's being affected, et cetera. So absolutely, I'm a huge proponent of local measurement, local communication about that, and transparency about that information as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Maybe another question, not really a question, maybe you could explain, Louis, or anybody could chime in, but for those who aren't as familiar with the dirt report and the tools that it provides, how localized of information can you get through the dirt report? Because right now it's the best thing we have in the industry, and it's really the only significant tool other than what people are creating on the side. So how do people use it and burrow down to a local information?
So the dashboard that they have on the website is something that you can use to drill down to more detailed information either by stakeholder, by all the different components that are available and reported on in DIRT, down to the state level. I believe at the county level that might be asking a lot, but I'm not sure if it's there. But I know they're putting out a 2.0 version of the dashboard that's going to be released, that's hopefully going to give more power to that drill down. And it is something that you can do today. But the caveat on all this, and don't get me wrong, it's the best thing we've got going today. But that doesn't mean it's a Lamborghini. So what you have is you have the information that's coming in from the sources you have coming in, and whether or not that changes over time. We're working hard to try to do trend measurements on comparable data sets, so we don't get a wild skew all over the place of this year we've got over here, and then this year we've got these people reporting. So cleaning that up. And I think the other component I'll mention is that we're focusing now on trying to create an index, kind of like the Dow Jones or something, some kind of an index that's an indicator of damages, numbers of damages, and that kind of thing that can be used to trend for their 50 and 5 that they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course, one thing to consider too is how all this data is going to vary state to state by who's putting entries into DIRT, and that's anonymous, so we don't really know for sure. But again, it's still the best thing. And so this is a question kind of for everybody that came from Mike Idanza, is does the DIRT report account for private utility lines and locating, since that private utilities actually make up, according to this number, 65% of the underground utilities. So does the DIRT report address private utilities? I think it does, right? A damage is a damage, but
I mean, they tell you the right of way or the location, the type of area that's been affected. So those can certainly be reported. I'm not sure what the volume of those particular types of reports are, versus public rights of ways and that kind of thing. But as somebody pointed out, it does depend on where the data comes from. I know one of the initiatives that are focusing on with the DPI, for example, is more steady reporting and more quality of the reporting. I see Brian's wanting desperately to chime in here.
Yeah, no, not desperately. So, but when I look at that, when I read the DIRT report, I think that the DIRT report should just be a starting point for all organizations within this space, right? It's never going to tell you exactly, or it's not going to be prescriptive to exactly what you need to do to reduce damages. It's going to highlight the work types, areas where there's some opportunities for training. And I think that's the important thing for us all on this call to recognize, is that the DIRT report will give us those macro data points, right? They're going to give us trends in the industry. And it's on us to take a look at those trends and say, how can I grab from that some pieces of information to create focus with my data? So when you look at things like projects for water and sewer main replacements, right? We know that those go deep, right? And we know that those have a strong correlation to damages. So how can we design our systems, design our staffing and our resourcing, and gather data for those types of projects to be able to see how we are going to make change in reducing damages? So I think it's a really good identifier of macro trends, but it's on us in this industry to take a look at those trends and say, okay, what can I do within those areas to focus on that, collect data on that, and be able to create change within my organization, and then hopefully share some of those changes and situations out with the rest of the organizations that we work with.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Brian. And in fact, that then dovetails really right into the second question, which is, how can data analytics be used to enhance the accuracy of locating underground utilities? And you could broaden that to and just preventing damage in general, along with enhancing locating. So I'm not sure which one of you wants to jump in on that one first, but somebody, I'm sure.
I can take a jab on that. There are leading indicators associated with the process of line locating, right? So we perform the line designation, we put in paint on the ground, right? And then after the fact, we will find out if we had an incident or not. So how we can learn from that information. I think if we can set up our processes, if we have a good quality root cause assessment, so we can take it down from level 1 excavator fault, and that is the reason. There was a question, a comment in the chat, like, okay, excavator was responsible, but what was the driver behind it? Similar goes, if it is an operator's at fault, then what's the driver? It's the line locating at fault, and what's the driver? So we have 2 tiers of causality, and that will help us, in my opinion, pinpoint audits, pinpoint where we need to focus, and how to go and retrain, how to go and change process, what we can step by step do better.
Yeah, good point. And kind of indirectly, Tracy, Brian's got a comment in the chat too, of, the fact that certain types of work projects require different skilled locating tech, and so the data hopefully can help point people to realize what kind of project it is and what kind of tech maybe needs to be sent, I think is what she's saying. I'm not sure if that happens now, but it sure makes sense. And Jason, you want to chime in too?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Both on that comment, as well as the data analytics driving improvements from not just from a digital perspective, but workflow perspective. So Tracy's comment is completely germane, right? You have different needs from a skill set perspective based off of what type of work is happening in the field, and then also individually as a utility, understanding what you have in the field in that particular area of conflict, right? So You start talking about high profile or high priority facilities, right? Anything from a fiber to the home perspective, feeder routes, et cetera, right? Those are very sensitive for us. So internally, what we have done is, we take that information, we synthesize it and try to understand, okay, what kind of work is occurring, to Brian's point and to Tracy's point, right? And what do I need to do to make sure that there's minimal incursion on those facilities, whether it's during the construction phase for us, immediately following the construction phase, but having an understanding of what's happening in the field. You can't be everywhere at once, right? I'm in 15 states. So you got to be able to understand what information's coming in to then go, okay, how do I make more informed decisions using my contract locator partner, using my internal focus, right, to kind of understand where do I need to go, where the ball is being, utilized the most, right? To use a sports type analogy to understand, all right, this is where I need to focus my efforts. This is my center of gravity for now, and then allow it to shift somewhere else as time goes in. But it's a daily, weekly, monthly requirement, right? You can't let that kind of thing get away from you too much.
For sure. And Dwayne, I see your hand up, and then Lewis after Dwayne.
Yeah, I think we can talk about data analytics, and we need to understand complexity of locates and maybe send the right tech. But fundamentally, still, I see late locating is still a major problem across many states in the US. So having that data doesn't actually change the fact that it doesn't matter if you get a good tech there or a bad tech there. You're not getting a tech there, full stop. So this late locating issue is still massive for a lot of states, for a lot of utilities, for a lot of third-party locators. And so how do you improve that? How do we decrease the workload for these guys? How do we distribute that workload? I know there was a case study done, Virginia. It was a rural program where these community-based organizations were doing fiber to the home, all rural-based. So a contract was set out. The locators were given 6 months notice of exactly where those cables were going to be laid, and the number one failure point for the utility was late locating. So I think this idea that even when you give a lot of information to locators and allow them to understand scheduling, it still doesn't work that well. And so putting a good tech or a bad tech or a more advanced tech on a locate. The problem just seems to be there's just not enough resourcing for the volume of work, and that's fundamentally one of the major problems to solve. Data analytics is just touching the edges, because that's the major one from my perspective, anyway.
And
yeah,
Lewis?
it does touch on the edges. But as we're talking about using data on a regular basis and at a local level, absolutely, your resources. If you're a locator, and I don't locate myself, but I can tell you that knowing where those resources are going to be most in demand, and also doing some risk assessment. That's the other component of this data analysis that makes a huge difference. Are you able to tell what the likelihood is of something occurring in a particular location with a particular type of excavation by that particular excavator? So that's a lot of data analytics that you can build over time. And then, of course, increasingly, we're seeing AI and things like that coming in that can produce that kind of a risk measurement. Because as we see this rural development of telecom and an incredible fiber push happening, people have to brace themselves. They have to make decisions on a daily basis in terms of risk and that kind of thing, and resource allocation and everything else. So that's another key component of data and analysis to be able to make intelligent decisions on a daily basis in the field.
Yeah, that's another good point. And Tracy has in the chat with a bunch of people agreeing with her too. The big issue, one of the big issues, is that sometimes a locate's called in 20 plus times, and so one would think that data should be able to help us solve that. But I guess if there's no enforcement or no tool other than just communication and trying to educate the excavator who's doing that, all it does is point to a problem and doesn't really give us a way to solve it. Well, let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, how do organizations manage their own data process without overwhelming the 811/notification center since we do have Canadians participating as well as US, 811 is not always the thing up there. It's clickbeforeyoudig.com, which works down here in the US too. But that's kind of what we talked about there, and or what Tracy mentioned in her comment. She was kind of ahead of the curve there. How do you deal with this overwhelming, tickets? Okay.
Well, I'm first.
Jason,
I'm going
you're
to go first. So I would say it's twofold, right? And I think Lewis briefly touched on it here just a second ago, as did Dwayne, right? What we're talking about resource management and resource control, right? How do you understand what the workflow is in the field? How many resources do you need to effectively accomplish that work? So this is a big piece in not just internal locate assets for utilities, but also for contract locators. You've got the raw data from a volume perspective to understand what you can reasonably expect from a work perspective, but how much of that is noise, right? How much of that is an excessive, unnecessary call in based off of a number of different factors, whether it's how that excavator manages that work, how the utility who's employing the excavator, if it's utility-based work, is managing that work. So at least from my perspective, right, at Metronet, we control that volume, right? Anything that works, any work that Metronet is performing now as an enterprise goes through a team that I control based out of Evansville, Indiana, right? That's where our headquarters is. So we had taken a kind of choice to go, okay, look, I can just let my excavators keep calling in the work in infinitum as much as they want to, but that will never allow me to help guys like Dwayne and Lou and the contract locator side and other utilities to know exactly what kind of workflow we have, because we're just letting them call in as many tickets as possible. So you got to take a good hard look at yourself, really, first and foremost, as a utility, to know, how do you manage that work? How does that work get managed in the 811 system? So that way you don't have an overwhelming number of tickets, to take out some of that noise that I think someone had also brought up earlier, right? How do you separate the understanding of good data versus just all this other data that's in the system? And I'm sure Lou and Brian will back me up on this one, because I've heard them speak to the same, but that's my perspective.
And Lewis, you get your hand up?
Yeah, I didn't want to step over Brian because he had his hand up as well, but let me just address
sorry,
this
couldn't see
issue with it. No, it's okay. Let me just address this issue because he's 100% right. Updates, absolutely, excessive updates create a tremendous noise. We're seeing those increase as a percentage. Different states are taking different tacks to try to work on it, but the ultimate place where all this data analytics hits the pavement is the utilities themselves. What will they do with this information? Because you have your install side over here, you've got your protection side over here, and a lot of times those two arms are not embraced. So one of the ways you use data analytics to affect change is you identify the cost and the return on investment and the waste that's associated with this for companies, so that they can say, hey, do what Jason's talking about in terms of windstream. Look at your own house. We all live in a glass house. So look in there and say, what are my contractors doing to contribute to the noise? And how can I put a stop to that? We had a case study with Segra that really showed that they were able to take a dent, a pretty good sized dent, out of their contribution, but it had to be pushed down from the master contractor there to tell them, hey, this is what you have to do. So really, it does take a vested interest on behalf of the utilities to make those things happen.
Yeah, that's great. And sorry for not going to you first, Brian. My little pop-up was covering your hand there on my screen.
It's okay.
So
yeah, so just a slightly different take here is, the question was how do organizations manage their own data process without overwhelming the 811 notification center? Just a slight tweak on that is, how do you manage your own process without overwhelming locators, right? We expect a lot of locators out in the field. As we all know, there are certainly a lot of resourcing constraints within this market, right? And so even the previous question of how do you enforce and create higher accuracy locates, it comes down to the individual, right? Invariably, we need individuals out in the field. So how are we helping to make their jobs easier so they can focus on what matters? And so when you look at data collection, 811 is just the jumping off point for data, and we can't just point to 811 in the DIRT report and say there's not enough data, right? we need to collect our own data. Facility owners need to collect that data, and the expectation should be placed on the contract locators to do that as well. And in the collection of that data, then you can start to make more informed decisions. 811 is only going to get you part of the way there, but that has to be done with an eye towards what that's going to mean for the locator and the impact that it's going to make on that locate. So when you look at gathering data for that locator, you know, the amount of distance that they located, even taking into account weather, the time of day that they performed the locate, all of that could be correlating components to damages, right? So how do you collect that quietly? That doesn't require user input. And then those that do require specific user input, how are we making that easy for them to collect and put that data in as accurately as possible? And that's often a challenge that we have to solve with the tools that we use in the field.
Yeah, great points, Brian. And Dwayne, you're up.
Just to follow on there from Brian, I guess we all know that if we can get better data from the locators, maybe digital data, and increase the accuracy of the data, then the plans going back to the locators next time round are going to get, they're going to be more accurate, easier for those guys to use. But there's still this overwhelming problem that we've got too many tickets coming into the system. California, USA North recently put a new system in. I'm not going to give myself a plug here, but they just had a 25% reduction in tickets, and they found it wasn't new tickets, it was retransmits and remarks and those types of tickets. So, if you build a one-call system that's really intuitive, actually gives the person what they need to be able to send the information correctly the first time, you can cut out a lot of noise from the system. And by cutting out this noise, we give the locators time to do a better job. I think that the second phase Brian's talking about is we also then need to start getting data flowing back through the 811 if possible, back through the utilities, and improving the ability so that locator can go out with accurate mapping and really do a job quickly. And then that will also help this whole situation. But I think we're going to find a way of reducing tickets going into the locate system, or the noise, the traffic that's coming through, the repeat traffic. Some people saying 20 times. It's just too many. That's my input to that.
Yeah, and John Christensen chimed in here on the chat too about some one-call centers allow scheduling of locate requests outside of the 2 to 3 day window, which then helps reduce the surge, I guess. Let's see.
Well, Scott, I have to say that was not the evidence. Like I said, there was a study done, and even when you told the locate companies weeks and weeks and weeks out, guess what happened? They still had late locates. So this concept that we can schedule and take out this flurry or these lumps and bumps, it's just not happening. It just doesn't happen. Even when you give the locate companies the data, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, nature abhors a vacuum, right, Dwayne? So nature abhors a vacuum. So yes, if you extend some time, then they'll just fill that to the, and maybe it's your skinny jeans talking, but I'll tell you this, it doesn't start or end with the one call. You're right. You can eliminate a certain amount of noise by making sure the ticket goes out correct the first time. But most of our research, most of our updates are not a result of them being confused. It's just a person on autopilot updating the ticket, or it hasn't been permitted and they create the ticket. The work's done and they're still updating the ticket. So it's not necessarily about the accuracy going out as it is in changing behavior around the process about, is it someone detached from the field who's creating tickets, who doesn't even know what's going on down there? Are they not giving us an accurate field contact number to begin with that they can communicate? Because the ticket is the start. But it really is, it should be the beginning of the conversation between the locators and the excavators, especially on what we're seeing in these increasingly large projects and these fiber builds of that. That has to be a day-to-day conversation happening locally on the ground.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And obviously you can tell with everybody saying it's not simple. There's not one solution, right? And it varies state to state. We do Excuse me.
Sorry.
Yep.
There's just there was one other interesting thing that happened, with a cutover with USA North is they had all these tickets in the old system and they wanted them all pulled across the new system. And we said, well, that's fine. You can pull them across, but they had to be all put in. There was a large number of contractors who decided not, like up to 100,000 tickets were not put back into the system. And the noise from those tickets, which was back to Lewis's point, people were just pushing the button every Monday morning and getting those locates redone, right? It was just like some administrator going, I've got my 50, 100 tickets. I push the button every Monday morning and I get them remarked. And we're going to change that attitude towards tickets and towards the free locating service, because, some excavators, they're just abusing it, unfortunately. Not all, but some.
I mean, if you all
Yeah.
think about
Yeah,
it,
and
keep in mind,
bringing it back to data, because this is, I know what we're talking about here, but that's what the data can tell you, right, Dwayne? I mean, if it's a problem with the way these tickets are being created, how many of them are being updated? We look at things like, we get down into the data minutia. How many of these people told us the work was going to take a day or less, but then it's been updated 2 or more times? So we know they've had over 45 days to do a job that they specifically told us was going to take a day or less. So that's a process problem. And by identifying that through the data, then you can start to challenge that.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. So the next question we were talking about addressing here is, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but in general, how do you ensure you get good information with quality data with tickets or any way that you're collecting the data? And I know a couple of you talked, Dwayne mentioned drop downs and other thing, but does anybody have any other tips for ensuring that you get good quality data?
I think being able to have really good mapping always comes up tremendously in the industry, whether it's the maps of the utilities, how accurate they are, how quickly they're getting into their systems, how quickly they're being sent into the one-call systems, how quickly are they getting out to the locators, that kind of thing. That accuracy plays so heavily into both the speed in which we can even process tickets, but then the accuracy and the location of where that is as well. So mapping is a tremendous component of this.
Good point. And Brian?
Yeah, I'm just going to emphasize a little bit what Dwayne started with at the start of this call is, as you look to collect this data, starting with the call centers, those free form fields are disastrous to try to normalize and work with. So, but to Dwayne's point, I can't emphasize it enough that your data analytics team, and you may not have one today, but you're going to have one eventually, just by the sheer nature of how things work. They're going to love you for being thoughtful enough to say, well, let's not make this free form. Let's make this a drop down. Let's make this a selection. Your locators are also going to like that too, right? Freeform text takes long. You're going to get inconsistent abbreviations, inconsistent results. So anywhere that you can think about, hey, how can I normalize this data? If you're measuring the distance, have a field for feet and inches, right? So when somebody's not putting 7.1 or 7.2, think through, that data collection process, eliminate those free form fields where you can, to try to really assist those in the future who are using the data today to be able to normalize those points.
Yeah, I agree. That makes perfect sense, Brian. And I know we agree with that in general, with just like our conference, when we're taking surveys of every session, because we can't do a better job with conference unless we get the feedback. But I will say, so in defense of a free form field, the leaving a field for that has been awesome for us, because that's where the few people who will take that time, it's the best information. But it's not the kind of thing you can track and make big changes on. So I agree. In principle, it's way better to have drop downs. But Jason, you got a comment there?
Sure, I do. To kind of dovetail off what Brian was saying, right? When you go back and look at the history of what 811 is and the utilization of the one call centers, it was always to encourage the excavators to actually use it to minimize their impact on the utilities, right? That was the bottom line up front. How do we get this thing utilizable? And you made it as simple as possible. You made it one number. You made that number the same for every, right? So now we're like, it's looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, right? That was where we were. We needed to have, tell us anything, right? Like Dwayne was talking about the huge freeform field. Well, something was better than nothing, right? Just, I'm going to be doing work here. Well, what kind of work? The work I do. Okay, well, that doesn't help me understand it. Now we've kind of evolutionized to the point where we can go, okay, we reasonably assume there's some kind of understanding of what the system is utilized for. We reasonably assume that everybody knows what the system does, right? It protects them as from a safety perspective. It protects the utilities to minimize incursions. So we could get to a point now where we can get the data quality from a submission perspective locked and braced, right? Bracketed into smaller and smaller. So, okay, here's the fields, here's the drop downs. If you got questions, a lot of 811 centers have great training programs. I know North Carolina does a great training program, or Michigan does a great training program. So it's a matter of making sure everybody understands, all right, this is where we were and this is where we're trying to get to. And there was another point about, we need to have a national understanding across the 50 states. I agree completely. But, how do in the country as it is currently, I don't know if we can get 2 states to agree on anything. So I think it's a great idea, but we're going to have to do some other work in that particular arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard not to get 2 people, much less 2 states. So why don't we go to the next question kind of quickly, because we're down to about 10 minutes to wrap this up. And so what specific key performance KPI should the industry stakeholders be using or focusing on to really help improve damage prevention? I mean, there's a 1,000 things out there, and I'm just looking for opinions on what you all think are the most important ones to focus on that can really impact change.
If I can take a stab on that, I think, everybody now is using the damage per thousand. That is the most common one KPI. Matt Worth started getting into damage per ticketed 1,000 tickets, so we can clear out the so-called noise of the no-call damages, so we can actually see what is the portion of the damage after we control them, after we're working something with those. It could be, the causes associated with that specific, and try to figure out, like before we're visiting about the CGA and the 3 predominant root causes: excavator, no call, or utility. Let's go and get deeper into that and see what is the current state and how we can get better into that, one step at a time. Isn't through reducing locating errors or maps or abandon. Let's pick one piece of the onion and start peeling it out. Before we're visiting about accuracy, audits. It's a fact, audits, the more audits you do, across the board, doesn't matter if you're operator, doesn't matter if you're line locating service provider or you're an excavator. The more accurate you confirm your data, your processes are, the safer you're going to be, the less potential for damage for an incident. So how many audits you do, how many job safety reviews you do if you're an excavator, how many damages, how many events you've got during your construction project. If you build all those KPIs and start working out, you will see eventually identifying trends from the individual to the team to the project type. So based on that, you can build your strategy. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Great. Anybody else have a comment on the most valuable KPI? Okay, then you know what? We are gonna move on here as the clock ticks down. So the last question that I want to go to each of the panel members with is, from your perspective, you're going to pass on one thing that you think people can do or the industry can do to seriously impact change and improve excavation safety and damage prevention. This is your shot to pass that tip on. And so Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, data is a 4-letter word. It can overwhelm, it can inhibit, it can be a roadblock. So I think for those organizations that are looking to be able to build out a data analytics component to their damage prevention program, start small, start local. Look at those macro trends that you see from the DIRT report, from the call centers data, from your cohorts in the industry. Start small, start with a specific region, and start with an actionable plan. Don't try to say, it's common grounds saying, hey, we want 50% reduction in 5 years, right? It's not on all of us to make that actionable, and that comes down to that local level, as Tracy pointed out. So start small, start understanding what data you have and what you don't, where you need to start collecting for that one little project. From there, you're going to cut your teeth, understanding what resources you can leverage, what systems data you can leverage, and then being able to expand that out further. So start small, be comfortable with iterating, and then build out your program from there with the data that you've gotten from analyzing that data to build out that program across the entire footprint of your organization.
Good. Thanks, Brian. How about you, Demetrius?
No, I agree wholeheartedly with what Brian mentioned. Start with what you got, identify what is important for you. What's important for me might be different from what's important to Jason, to Dwayne, or to Brian. I'm an excavating service provider, an excavator, and I have a trend of having late tickets within a specific area. Let's try and go, okay, that specific area, what is the driver? Why we have late tickets? Are we sending, too little, too long tickets as far as length? Are we sending too many tickets and the system cannot support that? So what's the driver? And after you identify what's the root cause, then you can go and say, okay, small pieces, what I can do to start changing that. See the trend. If it changes, that's great, it works. So let's move to the next problem. If it's not working, let's try something different. Piece after piece, always drive to Rome, but you need to start taking the first step. So.
Perfect, thanks. Lewis, what about you?
Unmute. Am I muted? Okay, sorry, my skinny jeans got the best of me, but hopefully you can hear me. Yes, the first thing is start with whatever you can. You have to take the first step, as was said earlier. You need a revolving way, so you need to make sure that you're doing it consistently. You need to be able to look at trends, and then you need to take actions at each little step to say, hey, did that change the behavior? Did that change? If it didn't, then you have to look at something else. For One Calls, we're very interested in how we educate, where we educate, what groups we're educating to, and what is the message. It's not call for click before you dig. Let them know that this is specific to you if you're a landscaper. This is specific to you if you're a fence builder. These are the kinds of things that you need to know. So start looking at your data anyway, prioritize it, and then distribute it. Be as transparent as you can. And if you're an operator, please feel free to mention. I know a lot of people are very holding it to their chests, but this communication out about where you're going, your path, whatever it is that you're getting ready to do, that communication is going to be really helpful for people to plan and get ready.
Good point. Jason, your turn.
Sure, at the risk of sounding unoriginal here at this point, I would just say know the end from the beginning, right? Know what you want to accomplish. What's your end state? So as an excavation company or a utility who's employing excavation companies or have their own internal assets, know what you want to accomplish. So very similar to what Brian and Demetrius and Lou have just said, right? Identify what you want to focus on, and that's what you focus on. And once you see some kind of moderation and improvement, and then you go, okay, I think we've got a good plan here. Let's move to the next thing. But identifying your end state up front will be critical in using data effectively to accomplish whatever end state you're seeking to accomplish.
Great. And Dwayne.
So Scott, I think you asked the question, what's the one thing? And I think improving the quality of GIS data is the number one thing for me. When you have highly accurate data, then locating is going to become really easy and quick, right? I'm not saying there's still not challenges with some complex sites, but it's going to make a lot of the locating really quick and really easy and really accurate. And then that controversial thing that once you have highly accurate data mapping, why can't the excavators also have a copy of that, and the locator supports that? And I think if you want to talk about this 50% reduction type thing, you've got to have a substantial change in the thinking around, you know, who's got access to this data. And the more data you can give to more people, the safer we're all going to be. The system's just not set up for it at the moment. So I think the biggest takeaway is figure out how to get high precision data, figure out how to build a process around that, and then we can go from there.
That's awesome, and that's
Sorry,
good information.
And that was my dog just adding to the flavor of that because she completely agreed. If you heard that.
And Demetrius, one more comment here before we go to wrap up.
Yeah, well, I do not disagree with Dwayne. I think it's important also to identify what's the impact of having the data. We are in a strange world lately, so having data for the sake of having the data outside, it's one thing. You know, it's a different thing if you have a fiber optic network outside, someone might cut it or has little impact, versus if you have gas network freely available, someone say, what is that? So we just, you know, just for us to think and be a bit more cautious, public safety is paramount. And the other thing, I do agree, Dwayne, with mapping the data, but we need to keep remember, we went out, we installed, we mapped, things change. I can have John Doe come in, digging in, installing something. My new accurate data, they are no longer accurate data because someone else did something. So we need to think, okay, yes, it's one thing to go, we have mapping system and accuracy, but how to maintain that?
Great point.
That is the challenge. That challenge is actually dealt with. And you just need to look outside the US to some degree, and you will see that some utilities have dealt with that problem, right? There's countries around the world we deal with that are dealing with this digital data every day. They have digital data, they have highly accurate data. So, you know, America's a smart place. We can easily do it. I mean, we can do it better than they can do it. So, hey, we just got to do it. We just got to get going and do it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, we're officially out of time, so I wanted to thank everybody. And one thing too, you'll notice Mike is going to put the link to the survey right here because the survey is crucial. Like everything else, we really need input, and we're also looking for topics for future ones. Also, if you'd like to receive a free copy of our 2023 Excavation Safety Guide, you can fill in your mailing address and we'll do it. Did want to mention that a blog post with the town hall specifics and information will be put up soon. And in that, we will also have the chat log, because we couldn't get to all of it because it's been awesome. There's just tons of great comments and questions in the chat that we'd like to get to. And then I do want to mention that November 9th is our next one, and we're going to be discussing, as you can see here, how can existing fiber optic cable be used for live damage prevention and enhanced security. It's really cool stuff, really cutting edge technology, and it's probably a little more of a presentation than normal so they can explain the technology, but then really looking for ideas and questions on how it can be used. So it should be a fun one. Then also, as a reminder, as we close out here, the Global Excavation Safety Conference is coming up soon, and Dwayne, to Dwayne's point, we do really focus on global issues because no one country has all the right answers, and so it's a great place to get to listen to everybody's input. And if you're a new attendee, there's a special deal, so go to globalexcavationsafety.com and you can register. And to our sponsor, Excavation Safety Guide, I want to thank them as well. And like I said, you can get a free one by giving us your mailing address. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for attending and thank the panelists especially for their time and all their great insights. So thanks everybody and stay safe and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.